So all of this is linked for the mother's fertility back to her menstrual cycle. So let's talk a little bit about the menstrual cycle. The menstrual cycle begins in what's called the follicular phase. The ovary is a series, or not a series, but a number, a very high number of little tiny follicles, a little hole, a little opening, and inside each follicle is an immature egg. The follicular phase is the time in the woman's menstrual cycle when the egg inside the follicle is brought to maturity. From an Ayurvedic perspective, this is a building phase. You're building the quality of the egg, and you're also building dhatu all throughout the body. This is the first phase of the menstrual cycle. The building of the endometrium is going to begin when menstruation ends. Let me say first what the endometrium is. The uterus has a lining. The endometrium is the innermost lining of the uterus. Each month, that is rebuilt, and then if there's a pregnancy, it is a nest for the fertilized egg. If there is no pregnancy, it's going to be sloughed off. That's what menstruation is the sloughing off of the endometrium when no pregnancy has occurred. From Ayurvedic texts, this began at the end of menstruation. From a Western perspective, the follicular phase of the menstrual cycle begins on the first day of menstruation. So it's just a little bit different, and I'll talk about why that difference as well. The follicular phase goes then from the beginning of the menstrual cycle all the way through to ovulation. Ovulation is when the egg is released from the ovary. In the Western follicular phase, this would go from day 1 till day 13 or so. And it's the time when the woman is not yet fertile. There is no egg traveling, so she's not yet fertile. But the egg in the follicle is being brought to maturity. That's why they call it the follicular phase. What's happening in the body during this time is that inside the follicle, the cells in the lining of the follicular wall are releasing estrogen. Estrogen is a female hormone that triggers the growth and the maturation of the egg. But the other thing that estrogen is doing is preparing the woman for pregnancy. Each month during the follicular phase, your body begins the process to get ready for pregnancy. I lost my train of thought. Sorry about that. Each month during that time, the body begins the process of preparing the body for pregnancy. Estrogen drives the formation, increases the dhatu formation of the rasa and of the rakta, of the mamsa, the meda, the asti, because it's getting the woman, it wants her to be perfectly ready. So if the egg implants, you've had a 2-week jump start on development of this pregnancy. You're ready for it. You have enough fluids. You have enough dhatu ready to sustain this pregnancy. So we think of estrogen, it's a building hormone. It builds the egg, brings the egg to maturity, but it also begins the process of building the dhatus. Because this is a building phase of this time of month, of the menstrual cycle, this is the Kapha phase. Kapha often begins cycles. It sets the foundation for the development of cycles. Ovulation is the next phase, and this is a very short phase. Ovulation is the Pitta phase because it transforms, the body gets a transformational aspect here. What we had was an egg, and the egg now is traveling, and during this phase, the ovulatory phase, is when fertilization is going to occur. Ovulation occurs in a moment, and the egg is fertile for 24 hours after ovulation. Although it says that the Pitta phase lasts from days 13 to 18, the fertile phase is only 24 hours. Once ovulation occurs, if the egg is not fertilized within 24 hours, then pregnancy is not going to happen that month. So this phase, although it says it's days 13 to 18, there's just a little window. It could have, ovulation may occur any of those days. This is the fertile phase of the cycle, and it's the only time when a woman can become pregnant. The estrogen peaks early, and progesterone is now on the rise. What does that mean? Inside the follicle, where those cells were producing estrogen, they kept producing estrogen throughout the entire first 2 weeks of the menstrual cycle. This accumulates high levels of estrogen in the body, and then at ovulation, when the egg is released, the estrogen levels are going to drop back off. Now what's going to happen at that follicle, it begins to produce progesterone. And progesterone is going to take us through the rest of the menstrual cycle. So we see this shift. First part of the cycle, estrogen is high, estrogen drops, ovulation occurs, progesterone is high, progesterone drops, menstruation occurs. It is possible to observe the signs that someone is fertile by looking at changes in the cervical mucus. So the vagina has many different types of discharge during the month. It's a mucous membrane, and so there are constantly fluids that may be moving out of this channel. There are certain fluids that are released along with the egg at ovulation, and these are referred to as cervical mucus. The cervical mucus discharge is different than discharge at other times of the month. It's a little bit more prevalent. There's a little bit more of it. And it tends to be clear. And as it looks like in the picture, they advise if you want to check this, you would take a little bit of that mucus between the fingers and then you begin to separate them just about an inch apart. And what's different about the cervical mucus than discharge from other times of the month is it's sticky, and so it adheres together and you get these attachment between the two fingers. It's a little bit more slippery as well. The purpose of this cervical mucus that's been released with the egg is to help the sperm swim to the egg. It gives them a direction because the ovulation has only occurred on one side. So those fluids that have traveled with the egg are going to kind of entice the sperm in that direction. But also it's a little bit slippery and it's going to make it easier for the sperm to travel. When there's dryness, it's hard to move. And so when it keeps things moist and slick, then things move more easily. Many types of natural family planning books will talk about assessing cervical mucus and being able to identify it. So you can find lots of information on that. There are other signs that a woman might look for to identify that she's fertile. Some women experience breast tenderness. That's an impact of estrogen. They might feel mild pelvic or lower abdominal pain. This would be indicators of ovulation. Not every woman feels these. There may be an increase in sex drive. Interestingly enough, when estrogen rises pre-ovulation, there's an increase in libido because that's the best time for fertilization to occur. So if she does, during that bump in estrogen, the libido comes up, then you have sex, and there'll be sperm in place at the time ovulation occurs, and there's the greatest possibility for fertilization at that time. There's also a bump in estrogen towards the end of the cycle, and so some women will experience that increase in libido again right before menstruation. So as we look at the signs that you know you are fertile, not everyone is self-aware and has that much body awareness to be able to really identify these. If you notice these, that's great. You can use them for natural family planning, but don't knock yourself if you don't recognize these because sometimes these are very subtle symptoms. If you track your moon cycle, you may begin to notice them more readily. So if you're tracking your moon cycle and you see, oh, I'm about on day 13 or 14, oh, I've got some tenderness in the breast. Or, oh, I felt that pain. I wonder if that was ovulatory. If you track these things, you will become more self-aware and notice them. The only reason really why you don't notice them is because you haven't brought your attention to them. So you can do that if you choose to. If you're working on, like I said, natural family planning would be the most important reason to be doing this. After the ovulatory phase, within 24 hours of ovulation, we move into the luteal phase. This is the Vata phase of the cycle, and it lasts following ovulation until menstruation. So I put like days 24, 28 here, but it's going to go as long as it has to. After ovulation, your body wants to prevent any sloughing off of the endometrium. The follicle that released the egg now becomes what's called the corpus luteum, the luteal body. And so that's why it's called the luteal phase. The follicle during the follicular phase has now become the luteum during the luteal phase. The follicle released estrogen. The luteum, the corpus luteum, releases progesterone. So a woman's cycle now shifts, her hormonal production now shifts from high estrogen into higher levels of progesterone. So what's progesterone do? Well, it blocks uterine contractions. It's going to support greater formation of the endometrium to make a really nice nest for that fertilized egg to implant in. And it prevents uterine contractions so that you can't slough this off before the egg has had the opportunity to implant. The body doesn't want to lose the egg, and progesterone makes sure that nothing's going to move yet. At the end of this luteal phase, progesterone peaks, and then it's going to drop. Now, I should say something here. If the egg is fertilized and the egg implants in the uterine wall, communication occurs between the egg and the ovary, and the body continues to produce progesterone. If, however, the egg did not get fertilized or, for whatever reason, did not implant in the uterine wall, then there can be no communication between the egg and the ovary. The progesterone then stops, and the endometrium sloughs off. The body's going to reset. Every month, it's preparing for the body to get pregnant, and it wants to start each month with fresh tissue. At the end of the month, if no pregnancy has occurred, then they want to slough off the tissue that was not used that month. This stage has both Vata and Kapha. Kapha dosha is responsible for the production of tissue, and during this phase, the endometrium is thickening and moistening and becoming a lovely nest, and that's more Kapha. At the end of the cycle, if there has been no pregnancy, if there has been no implantation of the egg, then Vata is responsible for the apanavayu, the shedding of the menstruation, the shedding of the endometrium. So what this chart is showing us is the fluctuations that occur between estrogen and progesterone. Estrogen, here in red, gradually increases during that first week. The estrogen being produced then is being used at the follicle to bring an egg to maturity. The estrogen continues to rise, and it begins the process of preparing, kind of slightly increasing all the Dhatu Agni to prepare the body for this upcoming pregnancy. Ovulation occurs and estrogen levels drop. The egg is now on its way. The Dhatu Agni are now responding to the estrogen and building Dhatu, and now the body's ready for the second phase. So we have the ovulatory phase here. Now the other hormone we're concerned with is progesterone. What you'll notice is progesterone kind of flatlines all the way up until ovulation occurs. When ovulation occurs, the follicle becomes the corpus luteum and begins producing progesterone, 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 and now our progesterone levels come up. And remember that our progesterone levels are designed to reduce uterine contraction and to build endometrium. If pregnancy occurs, we're going to get that implantation somewhere around in here, around about day 21. If pregnancy occurs, then our progesterone levels will stay high. If no pregnancy occurs, our progesterone levels drop, and as soon as they reach a critical mass, a low critical mass, then the body sloughs off the endometrium, and that is menstruation.